This isn't some fictional story I cooked up for drama. This is something that really happened to me, a chapter of my life that still feels raw to the touch. It's about how the person I was supposed to trust most in the world tried to destroy my future, all for a piece of paper. The air in my grandmother's house still smelled of her, lavender and old books, even though the floral arrangements from the funeral a week prior were beginning to wilt on the mahogany dining table, their sweet scent curdling into something cloying and funereal. My Aunt Carol held a single, crisp envelope in her manicured hand, her knuckles white as she pinched the corner. We were standing in the foyer of the old craftsman home in Austin's Hyde Park neighborhood, the afternoon sun slanting through the beveled glass of the front door, casting distorted rainbows on the hardwood floor. She had intercepted the mailman on the porch with the practiced ease of a hawk snatching a field mouse. My name, Chloe Davis, was written in stark black ink right there on the front, next to the return address of the estate lawyer's office. I saw it clear as day, a beacon of hope in the fog of my grief. But when I reached for it, her smile was as thin and sharp as a razor wire. "Oh, this," she'd said, snatching it back with a casual flick of her wrist, her voice dripping with a thick, syrupy concern that never reached her eyes. "It's just more paperwork from the estate, sweetie. All that dreadful legal jargon would just upset you more right now. I'll take care of it. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." My grandmother, Eleanor, wasn't just my grandmother. She was my anchor in a life that had felt perpetually adrift. My parents, both brilliant but restless academics, had chased tenure from one university town to another, leaving a trail of half-unpacked boxes and temporary friendships in their wake. Summers, Christmases, and any other break I could finagle were spent in the steadfast comfort of her Austin home. That house was my true north. She was the one who taught me to identify the constellations from her overgrown backyard. Her voice, a soft murmur against the chirping of crickets as she traced Orion and Cassiopeia in the vast Texas sky. She taught me how to bake a pecan pie that would make a grown man weep. The secret, she'd whisper, being a splash of bourbon in the filling. Most importantly, she taught me how to be resilient. "The world will try to knock you down, Chloe Bug," she'd say, her hands covered in flour as we kneaded dough on her worn butcher block countertop. "You just make sure you're rooted deeper than its punches are strong." Her death, after a swift, brutal battle with pancreatic cancer, didn't just tilt my world off its axis. It felt like the axis itself had shattered. My Aunt Carol, my mother's older sister, and the will's executor swooped in immediately, a whirlwind of performative grief and aggressive organizational fervor. Carol had always been difficult. She was the immovable object to my parents' transient force, the one who stayed in Austin, marrying a man with a comfortable portfolio and producing two perfectly polished children, my cousins, Mark and Ashley. She viewed my life in Chicago, my career in graphic design, my small apartment, with a kind of pitying condescension, as if my lack of a sprawling suburban home and a country club membership was a profound moral failing. Our relationship was a fragile tapestry of forced smiles at holiday gatherings and polite, surface-level phone calls, where she'd offer unsolicited advice on how I could finally settle down. But she was family, and in the raw, disorienting aftermath of my grandmother's death, I clung to that word like a life raft. I let her handle everything: the funeral arrangements at Weed Corley Fish, the calls to distant relatives, the daunting task of sorting through 60 years of a life well lived. I was too numb to do anything else. The day the lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, had read the will in his quiet downtown office, the air had been thick with unspoken tensions. It was straightforward. The house, its mortgage long paid off, went to Carol. She was the one with a family in Austin, the one who could keep it alive, as the will stated. Various heirlooms were divided among the cousins. And then there was the final provision. To my granddaughter Chloe, Mr. Abernathy had read, his voice gentle as he peered at me over his spectacles. I leave the remainder of my savings and investments in the amount of $120,000. May it be the foundation upon which you build a life as beautiful as the one you gave me. I just sat there, the words washing over me, feeling both hollow and electrified. It wasn't just money. It was a future. It was a down payment on a condo in my own city, an escape from the shoebox apartment where my landlord ignored my calls about the leaking ceiling. It was the capital to finally quit my soul-crushing corporate design job and start my own freelance business. A dream I'd whispered to my grandmother on so many late-night phone calls. It was freedom, handed to me by the person who loved me most. Carol had placed a comforting hand on my arm, her diamond rings cold and heavy against my skin. "She loved you so much," she'd whispered, her eyes shining with what I then, in my naivete, thought were tears of shared sorrow. Now, standing in that same foyer where my grandmother had hugged me goodbye so many times, watching her tuck the envelope with my name on it into her ridiculously expensive Louis Vuitton handbag, a cold knot of dread began to form in the pit of my stomach. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. Mr. Abernathy said the check would be sent out this week. Maybe that's it. Carol let out a light, tinkling laugh that sounded like ice cubes clinking in an empty glass. "Oh, honey, the legal system doesn't move that fast. This is probably just a confirmation of receipt or some other bureaucratic nonsense. Trust me, I'm the executor. I know how these things work." She patted my cheek, a gesture that was meant to be comforting, but felt deeply, profoundly patronizing. "You just focus on grieving. Leave the boring stuff to your old Aunt Carol." With a final, dazzling smile, she slung the purse over her shoulder and walked out, her heels clicking a sharp, decisive rhythm on the stone walkway, leaving me alone in the silent, lavender-scented house. The silence pressed in, and for the first time, it didn't feel like peace. It felt like a warning. Weeks bled into a month, and the knot of dread in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. I had to return to Chicago, to my job, to a life that now felt like a holding pattern. Every time I managed to get Carol on the phone, her voice was a masterclass in deflection, swaddled in that same suffocating layer of fake concern. The excuses became a rotating carousel of delays, each one more elaborate than the last. "The bank is being so difficult, you wouldn't believe the red tape. They lost the initial paperwork." Then it was. The market fluctuated right after the transfer was initiated. "So the funds are in escrow for a few more weeks. The lawyer says it's standard." A week later, it became, Mr. Abernathy's paralegal is on vacation in Tuscany. Can you believe the nerve? Nothing can be processed until she returns. Each lie was delivered with a gentle chiding tone that made me feel like an impatient, greedy child for even asking about my own inheritance. It was psychological warfare disguised as loving concern. My own mother was no help. When I tried to voice my suspicions to her, she sighed, a weary, static-filled sound over the phone line. Chloe, you have to understand. Carol is under a lot of stress. She's the executor. She's grieving too, and you're not making it any easier. Just be patient. She knows what she's doing. My cousins, Mark and Ashley, were even worse. They responded to my direct inquiries with vague pleasantries, perfectly parroting their mother's lines. Mom's got it under control, Chloe. She's a rock star. She handles everything. It was infuriating. I felt like I was screaming into a void. The family group chat, a digital fireplace, usually crackling with birthday wishes and vacation photos, fell strangely quiet whenever I brought it up. My polite questions, "Any update on the estate?" were met with a wall of digital silence, only to be broken hours later by an unrelated photo of Ashley's new puppy or a link to an article about the upcoming Zilker Park Kite Festival. Carol had built a fortress of silence around my inheritance, and the rest of the family were her willing sentinels. I was being gaslighted by my own family, and the humiliation was a slow, corrosive burn. Here I was, a 28-year-old woman, being treated like a fool by my own aunt, while the rest of my family either actively helped her or passively watched. The betrayal was a deeper, more agonizing wound. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about my grandmother's last wish, her final, profound gift to me, being twisted into a sickening power game. Carol wasn't just delaying the money. She was trying to erase my grandmother's final act of love, rewriting the end of her story to suit her own narrative. One rainy Tuesday in Chicago, as I stood staring out at the gray, unforgiving cityscape from my tiny apartment window, something inside me shifted. The grief, which had been a heavy, suffocating blanket, began to smolder. The helplessness I'd been feeling for weeks began to burn away, leaving something else in its place. A cold, hard, diamond-sharp resolve. My grandmother had told me to be rooted deeper than the punches. This punch was meant to knock me out, to make me give up and walk away, defeated and confused. But Aunt Carol had made a critical miscalculation. She had mistaken my grief for weakness. She thought I was just the quiet, artistic niece from out of town, the one who was too polite to make a scene. She had no idea who I was about to become. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating my determined face in the dim light of the room. My first search was simple: how to find out if a check has been cashed without account access. The second was more specific: the name of every major bank headquartered in Texas. The war had begun. She just didn't know I was fighting back yet. I booked a flight back to Austin for the following weekend, fabricating an excuse about needing to collect the last of my personal items from the house. I sent a breezy, cheerful text to the family chat. "Hey everyone, surprise! Coming home this weekend to get the last of my stuff. Hope to see you all." Carol's reply was instantaneous, a string of heart and smiley face emojis that made my stomach turn. "We can't wait to see you, sweetie. The guest room is all ready for you." I stared at her message, at the cheerful, deceptive little hearts, and a chill that had nothing to do with the Chicago weather ran down my spine. The house she now owned, the house filled with my most cherished memories, was about to become my battlefield. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I wouldn't leave until I had burned her fortress of lies to the ground. The flight to Austin was fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage that felt like a coiled snake in my gut. I spent the 3 hours in the air, not watching movies or reading, but meticulously outlining a plan in a small black notebook. It felt melodramatic, something out of a spy movie, but I knew I couldn't afford a single misstep. Carol was a master of social manipulation, a direct confrontation without irrefutable, undeniable proof would be a catastrophe. She would twist my words in a nanosecond, painting me as the hysterical, greedy, ungrateful niece, and she'd have the entire family nodding in agreement before I could even present my case. I had to become a ghost, moving through the shadows of the perfect life she was so carefully curating. My first stop after landing at Austin Bergstrom wasn't my grandmother's house, but a small coffee shop in South Congress called Joe's. I needed a neutral place to ground myself. I ordered an iced turbo and sat at an outdoor table, watching the vibrant, weird life of the city parade by. This was my grandmother's favorite part of town. We'd spent countless Saturdays exploring the quirky shops, listening to street musicians, and sharing a bag of warm mini donuts from a food truck. The memory should have been comforting, but now it only sharpened the edges of my resolve. She would have been incandescent with fury. She would have told me to fight. My plan had 3 distinct phases. Phase 1, information gathering. I needed to know exactly what Carol had done. Phase 2, evidence collection. I needed undeniable, screenshotable, blasted to the entire family group chat proof. Phase 3, detonation. I hadn't worked out the precise details of that last part yet, but I knew it had to be public, decisive, and utterly final. I started with a call to Mr. Abernathy's office from the coffee shop patio. I modulated my voice, pitching it to sound a little lost and overwhelmed, the role she had cast for me. "Hi, this is Chloe Davis," I said softly. "I'm Eleanor Davis's granddaughter. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I was just going through some of my grandmother's papers and got a bit turned around. My Aunt Carol mentioned there was some sort of issue with the estate's bank, and I was just hoping to get a clearer timeline on when it might be resolved." The paralegal who answered was polite but firm, a human firewall. "I'm sorry, Ms. Davis, but as your aunt is the executor of the estate, we are legally bound to only discuss the specifics of the estate's financial disbursements with her." It was the answer I expected, but it was still a door slamming in my face. I didn't let her hang up. "Oh, of course. I completely understand," I said quickly, injecting a note of embarrassment into my voice. "I don't need any specifics at all. That's her domain. I was just wondering, and this might be a silly question, which bank the estate account is with? I think my aunt mentioned it was a local one, and I wanted to make sure I had the right one in my notes for my records." It was a piece of social engineering so simple, it felt audacious. There was a pause, the rustle of papers on the other end of the line. I held my breath. "The primary account for the Davis estate is with Frost Bank," she said finally, her professional tone unwavering. Bingo. "Thank you so much," I breathed, trying to keep the triumph out of my voice. "You've been a huge help." Frost Bank, a major Texas institution, solid and respectable. My grandmother had banked there for 50 years. Carol, I knew from years of overhearing her complaints about their customer service, used Bank of America for her personal and household accounts. A different ecosystem entirely. This was a very good thing. It meant she would have had to physically deposit the check or use a mobile deposit to move it into her own account, creating a clear, cross-bank transaction, a digital breadcrumb trail. I drove to my grandmother's house, the house that was now Carol's. She greeted me at the door with a hug that felt like being wrapped in a cold, damp blanket. "Chloe, you should have told me you were coming straight here. I would have made lunch," she chirped, her eyes doing a swift, critical scan of my travel-worn clothes. The house had already changed in the short time since I'd left. The old, comfortable furniture with its faint indentations from years of family gatherings was gone. It had been replaced by sterile, beige pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine for people with no personality. My grandmother's essence was being systematically scrubbed away, replaced by Carol's cold, modern aesthetic. I forced a smile, a tight, artificial thing that made my cheeks ache. "I just wanted to get it over with," I said, gesturing vaguely to the boxes I'd left in the guest room during my last visit. "I promise I'll be out of your hair by tomorrow." The excuse worked. She was already distracted, her phone buzzing with notifications. She left me alone, busy with a flurry of calls about a ballet gala she was co-chairing. The guest room, my old room, was the only place that felt untouched. I sat on the edge of the bed where my grandmother used to read me chapters of The Secret Garden and took a deep, centering breath. It was time for the riskiest part of Phase 1. I needed access to Carol's home office. My chance came that evening. Carol announced she had a terribly important last-minute dinner meeting with the catering committee for the gala. "You'll be okay here by yourself for a few hours, won't you, sweetie?" she asked, already dabbing Chanel No. 5 on her wrists. "Don't wait up. Robert's at a poker night." The moment her white Lexus SUV pulled out of the driveway, I was moving. Her office was downstairs, a sleek, minimalist room that reeked of her expensive perfume and ambition. It was an amateur move, but I started with the obvious. The top drawer of her polished chrome desk. It was locked. Of course it was. My eyes scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. My gaze landed on a decorative silver box on her bookshelf, the kind of thing meant to hold sentimental keepsakes. Inside, nestled amongst old photos of my perfectly coiffed cousins, was a small, ornate silver key. It was almost too easy, a cliché, but Carol was nothing if not predictable in her vanities. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid the key into the lock and turned. The drawer slid open with a soft, expensive-sounding click. It was filled with files, all neatly labeled in her perfect, flowing script. Gala committee, country club membership, household expenses. And then, near the back, I saw it. A folder labeled Eleanor Estate. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside was a copy of the will, various bank statements, and a thick stack of correspondence from Mr. Abernathy's office. And there it was, tucked inside a plastic sleeve, a carbon copy of the check from the Frost Bank estate account. It was dated just 3 days after the will reading. Made payable to Chloe Davis for $120,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. I flipped the copy over. On the back, in Carol's elegant, looping handwriting, was a practice endorsement, for deposit only. Underneath was an account number I didn't recognize. I snapped a picture of the front and back with my phone, my mind racing. She had it. She had it all along. She had looked me in the eye and lied over and over and over again. This was the what, but it still wasn't enough. A copy wasn't proof of deposit. I needed to know where that money went. I memorized the account number on the back of the check, locked the drawer, put the key back in the silver box exactly as I'd found it, and walked out of the office, my mind a maelstrom of fury and ice-cold calculation. I now had the breadcrumb. It was time to follow it through the dark woods of her finances. Back in the relative safety of the guest room, I pulled out my laptop, my movements quiet and deliberate. The account number was from Bank of America. It had to be hers. I took another gamble, a leap of faith based on years of observing her predictable behavior. I went to the Bank of America website and clicked Forgot Password. I entered Carol's personal email address, which I knew from years of family email chains, and the system prompted me with a security question. It was the one I'd seen her use for everything from her airline miles account to her online shopping profiles. What was the name of your first pet? I typed the answer instantly. Sunshine. It was a ridiculously cheerful name for a grumpy old Persian cat that had despised everyone but her, and my grandmother and I had teased her about it for years. A password reset link was immediately sent to her email. This was the point of no return. I needed to access that link without her knowing. I used a temporary email service to create a disposable address, and then, using a carefully crafted email template, I sent a message to Carol. The subject line was designed to be irresistible to her. Urgent. Gala catering confirmation and menu approval. I knew she wouldn't be able to ignore it, even during her important dinner. The body of the email was simple and professional. Dear Carol, please find the final menu confirmation attached for your review. We need your approval by 9 p.m. tonight to lock in the rates with our purveyors. Best, the Four Seasons Catering. I attached a harmless PDF of a generic catering menu I'd found online. As I'd hoped, her vanity and her obsession with a social standing were her Achilles' heel. I waited, watching my phone's Wi-Fi scanner. A minute later, I saw a new device connect to the house's network. She was home, and she had almost certainly just opened my email on her phone. I held my breath, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. A moment later, I sent a second email, this one spoofed to look like an official IT security alert from her email provider. Suspicious login attempt detected on a new device. Please click here to secure your account immediately. The link, of course, didn't lead to a security page. It led to a session hijacking site I'd learned about in a college coding class. A simple but effective phishing tool that would give me temporary one-time access to her browser cookies, including her logged-in email session. It was a digital longshot, but her panic was the bait. A few agonizingly long seconds later, a notification popped up on my screen. I was in. I had a 60-second window into her email inbox before the session timed out. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a blur of motion. I found the password reset email from Bank of America, clicked the link, and changed her password to something simple I could remember. Eleanor 1945, my grandmother's name and birth year. It was a small, viciously satisfying act of rebellion. It was done. I logged out, cleared all my tracks, and took a long, shaky breath. The air in the room felt thick, electric. I now had the keys to her kingdom. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of what I was about to find. Logging into Carol's Bank of America account felt like a profound violation, a step into a moral gray area I'd never imagined crossing. But I pushed the guilt down, replacing it with the cold, hard image of her face, as she'd smiled that razor-thin smile and tucked my future into her purse. The website loaded, and I navigated to her primary checking account. I scrolled back through the transaction history, my eyes scanning the dates, my breath held tight in my chest. And then I saw it, dated just one day after she had intercepted the mail. A mobile check deposit. The amount, $120,000. The image of the deposited check was available for viewing. My cursor trembled as I clicked on it. The image loaded, fuzzy at first, then sharpening into horrifying clarity. My name, crisp and clear. The memo line, "For your future." My grandmother's familiar, elegant handwriting. And on the back, Carol's forged signature scrawled underneath my name, followed by her account number. She hadn't even bothered to endorse it for deposit, only as she'd written on the carbon copy in her files. She had straight up forged my signature. It was bank fraud, a federal offense. A gasp escaped my lips, sharp and ragged in the quiet room. This was it. This was the cannonball I needed to sink her battleship of lies. I took screenshots of everything. The transaction history showing the deposit, the front and back of the cashed check with the forged signature, the account balance, which was now, I noted with a surge of bile, significantly lower. It seemed Carol had wasted no time in starting to spend my future. There were charges for a new designer wardrobe from Neiman Marcus, a $20,000 down payment on a brand new Lexus for my cousin Ashley's college graduation, and a $5,000 anonymous donation to the ballet gala, no doubt to ensure her name was prominently displayed in the program. The rage that washed over me was so intense it was dizzying. She wasn't just stealing from me. She was using my grandmother's legacy, her hard-earned money, her final gift, to peacock around Austin society, to buy status and affection for her already spoiled children. She was spending my foundation on frivolous, fleeting things, spitting on the very intention of the gift. I saved everything to a secure, encrypted flash drive, then meticulously cleared the browser history and cache on my laptop, leaving no trace of my digital intrusion. The next morning, I packed my remaining boxes, my movements calm and deliberate, an eerie serenity settling over me. When Carol came downstairs, she was glowing, talking animatedly about how she'd saved the gala from a catering disaster at the last minute. I just nodded and smiled. A placid Mona Lisa smile that I could feel was unnerving her. "You're awfully quiet this morning, sweetie," she said, narrowing her eyes slightly as she poured her coffee. "Just tired," I replied, my voice even and smooth as glass. "Long flight, ready to get back to Chicago." I loaded the last box into my rental car. She stood on the porch, waving, the perfect picture of the caring, doting aunt. "Drive safe, and don't you worry about that estate stuff. I'll call you the second there's any news," she called out, her voice bright with false sincerity. I gave her one last look, memorizing the smug satisfaction on her face. It was the last time she would ever look at me with that sense of unearned superiority. As I drove away from the house my grandmother had built, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt powerful. I had the truth, tucked away on a tiny piece of plastic and metal in my pocket. Phase 2 was complete. Now it was time to plan the detonation. The flight back to Chicago was a world away from the one a few days prior. The simmering rage had cooled into a chillingly clear purpose. I didn't need a notebook to plan Phase 3. The steps were laid out in my mind like a blueprint. This wasn't just about getting my money back anymore. A quiet legal threat from a lawyer would probably achieve that eventually. No, this was about justice. It was about making sure that every single person in our family, the ones who had stayed silent, who had taken her side, who had allowed me to be gaslighted and dismissed, saw her for exactly who she was. The family group chat, ironically named Davis Clan Shenanigans, was her stage. It was where she performed her role as the magnanimous matriarch, posting filtered photos of her perfect family, sharing saccharine, inspirational quotes, and organizing holiday get-togethers with an iron fist in a velvet glove. It was the perfect venue for her public execution. I spent the next 2 days preparing my arsenal with the meticulous focus of a munitions expert. I organized the screenshots into a clear, chronological narrative, a digital story of her crime. I used a simple video editing software to create a short screen recording of me logging into her bank account, using the password I'd set, Eleanor 1945, and navigating to the damning transaction. I wanted to eliminate any possibility of her claiming the images were doctored or taken out of context. This had to be overwhelming, undeniable, and utterly devastating. There could be no wiggle room, no space for her to spin another lie. The final piece of my plan was the most delicate. I couldn't go into this battle alone. I needed an ally, a respected voice within the family who could act as my second, validating my claims and amplifying the impact. My uncle, Carol's husband Robert, was a decent man, but weak-willed and completely under her thumb. My cousins were lost causes, thoroughly brainwashed by a lifetime of their mother's manipulations. Then I thought of my grandmother's younger brother, my great-uncle Ben. He lived in San Antonio, a retired Army colonel who valued honor and integrity above all else. He was a man of few words, but those words carried immense weight. He and Carol had never been close. He found her flashy lifestyle and relentless social climbing distasteful, a fact he made little effort to hide at family functions with his gruff silence and disapproving scowl. He had adored his sister, my grandmother. They had spoken on the phone every Sunday for 40 years. I gave him a call. I kept it brief and professional, speaking his language. "Uncle Ben," I said, my voice steady. "This is Chloe. I need to discuss something with you regarding Grandma Eleanor's estate. It's a matter of some gravity, and I would value your counsel before I take any official action." The phrase gravity and official action did the trick. He agreed to a video call that evening. On the call, I didn't cry or rage. I calmly and methodically laid out the facts, just as I would if I were presenting a briefing to a commanding officer. I shared my screen and walked him through the evidence. The copy of the check from the lawyer's file, the screenshot of the mobile deposit into Carol's account, the sickeningly clear image of the forged signature, and the itemized list of her lavish expenditures. I watched his face on the screen as the evidence mounted. His expression, usually set in a stern but kindly grid, hardened into something I'd never seen before. A cold, controlled fury that seemed to emanate from the screen. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arm of his chair. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. "That woman," he finally said, his voice low and gravelly, a dangerous rumble. "That woman has brought shame upon our family name. She has spat on her mother's grave." He looked me directly in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "What is your plan, Chloe?" I told him everything. I explained about the group chat, about my intention to expose her in front of everyone, to burn down her carefully constructed facade. I half expected him to tell me to handle it privately, to hire a lawyer and avoid a messy family scandal. Instead, a grim, almost predatory smile touched his lips. "Good," he said. "A public crime deserves a public reckoning. You cannot allow a snake to shed its skin in private. It will only grow a new one. You must show everyone the venom. Send your message at 1900 hours, Central Time, tomorrow. I'll be ready." The next day passed in a surreal blur. I went to work, designing logos and editing photos like an automaton, my mind a million miles away, counting down the hours. All I could think about was the coming storm. At 6:50 p.m. Central Time, I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, my phone in my hand. My heart was pounding a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. This was it. There was no going back. The life I had known, the family I had, was about to be irrevocably altered. I took a deep breath, opened the Davis Clan Shenanigans group chat, and began to type. My opening salvo was simple, a quiet shot across the bow, designed to get everyone's attention. "Hi, everyone. I'm sorry to do this here, but I have an important and upsetting matter to discuss regarding Grandma Eleanor's estate and Aunt Carol's handling of it." Immediately, the 3 little dots appeared next to Carol's name. She was typing. Before she could respond, before she could seize control of the narrative, I sent the first image, a crystal clear picture of the check for $120,000 made out to me. Then the second, the screenshot of the back of the check, with my forged signature and her Bank of America account number scrawled underneath. I followed it with the screenshot of her bank statement, the $120,000 deposit clearly visible, a black and white monument to her greed. My phone started to buzz with notifications from the chat, a cascade of confusion. My cousin Ashley typed, "Chloe, what is this? Is this some kind of sick joke? You need to stop." Mark added, "Mom said there were legal delays. You can't just post private financial stuff like this. It's illegal." Carol's response finally came through, a flurry of panicked, indignant text. "Chloe, this is wildly inappropriate and frankly libelous. I have no idea where you got these fabricated documents, but you need to stop this right now. I have been working tirelessly to sort out this very complicated estate, and this is the thanks I get? Slanderous accusations in a public forum? I am appalled." Before anyone could rally to her defense, before the seeds of her fabricated documents lie could take root, I dropped the bomb. I uploaded the screen recording. "If the documents are fabricated, Aunt Carol," I typed, my fingers cold and steady, "then maybe you can explain this." The video, clear and undeniable, showed me logging into her bank account and replaying the discovery of the deposit in real time. I let the video play out in the chat, a silent, damning film of her crime. The chat fell completely, deafeningly silent. For a full 30 seconds, no one typed a thing. I could almost feel the collective intake of breath across a half-dozen states. They were all watching. They were all seeing the undeniable, unspinnable truth. Then Uncle Ben made his move. His message appeared, stark and authoritative, each word a hammer blow. Carol, I just got off the phone with my lawyer, a man who used to prosecute federal crimes. What you have done is called bank fraud, a felony punishable by up to 30 years in prison and a $1 million fine. You have stolen from your own sister's grandchild. You have dishonored your mother's memory. You will wire every single cent of that money to Chloe's account by noon tomorrow. If you do not, I will personally escort a federal marshal to your front door. Do you understand me? The silence that followed was even more profound. A digital vacuum. Carol's name appeared, the 3 dots blinking, then disappearing. Blinking, then disappearing again. She was trying to formulate a response, a lie, a defense. But there was none. She was trapped, exposed in the bright, unforgiving glare of a dozen phone screens. I sent my final volley. It was a collage of the receipts from her spending spree. The Lexus down payment, the Neiman Marcus binge, the gala donation. My final text was addressed to the entire family, a quiet, devastating epilogue. This is what Grandma's legacy was spent on. This is what her final gift to me became. I'll leave you all to discuss it. I'm sure Carol has a wonderful explanation. And with that, I typed 2 final words into the chat. Goodbye, Carol. And then I tapped her name, hit remove from group, and confirmed. The finality of the act was absolute. It was over. I leaned back in my chair, my body trembling with the violent release of a month's worth of tension, anger, and grief. The notifications continued to pour in, a chaotic chorus of shock, confusion, and outrage from my extended family. But I didn't read them. I just stared at the screen, at the digital wreckage I had created, and waited for the fallout. The immediate aftermath was a digital firestorm. My phone buzzed and pinged incessantly for hours, a relentless barrage of notifications from the family chat I had just blown apart. I saw snippets on my lock screen as they scrolled past. My Uncle Robert feebly attempting to defend his wife. There's more to the story. My cousins alternating between confused questions. I don't understand. Mom wouldn't do that. And outright accusations. You've destroyed this family, Chloe. And a flurry of messages from more distant aunts and uncles, expressing pure, unadulterated shock. I ignored them all. I put my phone on silent, made myself a cup of chamomile tea, and sat in the quiet of my Chicago apartment, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain out of me, leaving a strange, hollow calm in its wake. I had detonated the bomb. Now, all I could do was watch the shockwave travel. The first direct contact came just before midnight. It was an email from Carol's address, but the tone was all wrong for her. It was terse, panicked, and stripped of all her usual flowery, manipulative language. It was clearly from my Uncle Robert. Chloe, please call me. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Carol is distraught. We can sort this out. We will get you the money. Please just take down those posts. Think of the family. I read the email twice. The phrase, terrible misunderstanding, was so laughably inadequate, it was insulting. There was no misunderstanding. There was only theft and deception. I moved the email to my trash folder without replying. There was nothing to discuss. The time for sorting things out privately had passed the moment she'd snatched that envelope from my hand. The next morning, as Uncle Ben's noon deadline approached, the desperation escalated. I received a string of frantic voicemails from Robert, each more pleading than the last. He talked about Carol's reputation, about the family's good name, about the shame this would cause Mark and Ashley. He never once mentioned the fact that his wife had committed a felony. He never once apologized for what she had done to me, for the lies, for the gaslighting. It was all about protecting their comfortable, carefully constructed world. At 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the deadline, I received an email notification from my bank. A wire transfer had been initiated. The amount, $120,000. The sender, Robert Davis. I stared at the numbers on the screen for a long time. It was my money, my future, my grandmother's gift, finally where it belonged. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I had won. But the victory felt different than I'd expected. It wasn't triumphant or joyous. It was quiet, somber, and heavy with the cost of the battle. An hour later, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize in San Antonio. It was Uncle Ben. "The funds have been transferred?" he asked, no preamble. "Yes," I confirmed, my voice a little thick. "I just got the notification." "Good," he said, a note of grim satisfaction in his tone. "Robert called me this morning, begging me to be reasonable. I told him my only intervention would be a call to the U.S. Attorney's Office if that money wasn't in your account by noon. I don't think he'll be forgetting that conversation anytime soon." There was a pause. "Chloe," he continued, his voice softer now, "what your aunt did was unforgivable, but the rot in that branch of the family runs deep. You were right to expose it to the light. Sunlight, after all, is the best disinfectant." We talked for a little while longer, and for the first time, I felt like I truly had a family member in my corner, an anchor in the storm. He told me my grandmother would have been proud of my strength, and that meant more to me than the money ever could. The family, as I had known it, was fractured beyond repair. The Davis clan shenanigans group chat was deleted. My cousins sent me a few final, angry, blame-filled texts, which I read and then blocked without a response. My mother, who had been a passive, silent observer throughout the entire ordeal, finally called me, her voice choked with tears. She apologized for not believing me, for not standing up to her sister, for her own cowardice. It was an apology I accepted, but our relationship would forever be strained by the memory of her silence, a quiet but profound betrayal of its own. I never spoke to Carol or Robert again. Through the family grapevine, filtered through Uncle Ben, I heard bits and pieces of the fallout. They became social pariahs. News of the incident spread like wildfire through their tight-knit, gossipy Austin community. The story, stripped of its digital evidence and reduced to whispers at the country club bar, was simply that Carol had stolen her dead mother's money from her grieving niece. There was no coming back from that. She had to step down from her gala committees. She resigned from the country club board, and they eventually sold the house, my grandmother's house, and moved to a sterile, gated community in a Dallas suburb, seeking the anonymity of a new city. They had the money to run, but they could never outrun the shame they had earned. As for me, I used the money exactly as my grandmother had intended. I put a down payment on a beautiful loft condo in the West Loop of Chicago, with huge floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with light. I quit my soul-crushing corporate job and poured the rest of the funds into launching my own boutique design studio, which I named Eleanor Designs in her honor. My work thrived. I found a freedom and a confidence in myself that I never knew I possessed. I had been tested by the worst kind of betrayal, pushed to my absolute limit, and I had not only survived, but I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more deeply rooted than ever before. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I walk out onto my balcony and look up at the glittering Chicago skyline, a breathtaking tapestry of light and ambition. I think about the price of my peace, the family I had to burn down to find it. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that integrity is thicker than blood, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people who are trying to drown you. The end.